Welcome back. This is the Scaling Secrets podcast. Bill Extrom is here, and his primary passion is growth, especially how coaches and leaders impact the growth and performance of individuals and teams. Bill founded the Excel Institute, that's ECSELL. Excel Institute is a research-based organization that works with leaders internationally to help them better understand, measure, and elevate coaching's impact on performance. So if you want to be a better leader, a better entrepreneur, a better business person, a better communicator, then this is the must-have podcast you watch and listen to. And Bill will tell us all about it. So Bill, glad to be speaking with you.
Well, Robert, thank you. It's fun to be with you.
And it's fun to have you here as well. There's so many things in life, appointments where you say, oh, do I really have to like fire up the camera and put on a shirt and get to my computer? And you dread things. But then as soon as you hit that record button, you say, what was the big deal about it? And life can and should be fun. And so we said a little bit about you and your company, but in your own words, what is Mr. Bill all about? What's the elevator pitch? What has you excited lately?
Bill is talking about myself in third person. I am all about growth. And when I say that, it came about in an interesting way. We're a coaching research-based organization. And we work in three disciplines: business, athletics, and education. Each of those, we quantify the impact leaders have on the performance and growth of their teams in business, coaches have on the performance and growth of their teams in athletics, and teachers in a classroom, and so on and so forth. So we've always been about growing. And it was years ago, I was sitting down with my coach, and in our very first session together, she walked into my office and she sat down and we did all the pleasantries. And she said, all right, let me ask you a question. She said, what is your why? And I said, oh, Kathy, that's easy. Our why is, creating a world where everybody knows what it feels like to have a better coach. And she said, no, that's your company's why. What's your why? And I mean, Robert, she should have just shut her book and said, I'm out, and just walked away, because whatever we covered in the next hour and 50 minutes of our time together, I don't remember. But as simple as that sounds, I had never taken the time to analyze what my why is. And it took me, it wasn't in that moment, but that moment it took me days to realize, because people always say, oh, your why is coaching, your why, and it's not. My why is growth. Everything I do, I have to be evolving, whether it's training a therapy dog, whether it's our team at work, whether it's the business itself. There's always got to be, in perhaps your language, scaling. There has to be a way to evolve, to continually grow, because if we stay the same, we go backwards. So I'm all about growth. There's a long answer to a short question.
And that's great. If you're not growing, then you're stuck in a loop, right? You're being a machine. You're on an assembly line. And I love your mindset here because, like you said, growth can be applied to so many things, right? With your dog activities, with your business, and in sports and hobbies and anything that you do, there's this potential if you have that good mindset about it and not just, well, I'll learn this finite amount and I'll have this scarcity mindset and then it'll be done. There's always new things to do. And whenever I go and do like computery stuff and I go and click on tabs and spreadsheets, sometimes I go just because there are things that were awkward at first that as I got better at it, I became faster and thought of like new and better ways to do it. So I love that mindset. And so you have to wonder that the average person probably does not consider these things, like, right? Even you yourself, you got to this point where you were kind of hit over the side of the head basically and said, I can't believe I have not asked myself this simple question. And I imagine that trying to get there maybe is like a little bit like painful or anger inducing to dig into the layers and say, like, I can't believe I never thought about my why, and kind of considering all the things that it could be. So like, what was that process like for you from saying, I can't believe I never considered my own personal why, to that figuring it out? Like you mentioned, there was like an hour, 50 minutes remaining in that session. Did you figure it out by the end? Was it a years-long process? How did you get from not knowing you need a why to figuring out what this growth why?
Well, that's a really wonderful question, Robert. And it certainly was not in the moment. And it took days, if not weeks. And I do remember the event or the moment that it came to me. But along that journey, and see, the journey itself is about growth. The journey itself is about scaling, and not to get off on a tangent, but your podcast is about scaling. And so often we never put it in the sense of ourself. How are we scaling? How are we growing? How are we? We are all limiting. We're all creating basically a lid to the growth, to our own scaling of our businesses. And we have to realize that if we want our business to scale more, that means we got to take the lid off ourselves first. We got to evolve. We have to change. We have to continually think and reinvent ourselves. Now back to your question. It was, and every now and then I can get very obsessive compulsive. And I say every now and then, my wife would probably chuckle and say, every now and then, honey, more like all the time. Anyway, I was in my office and I was leaning back and that question was just burning. And I don't know if it had been days or weeks. It was just burning in the back of my mind. And I'm looking across the room at I'm trying to think of the name of the trees. It's a tropical tree. It has big flowers. You can grow them in pots. They're all over Hawaii. And anyway, my wife would buy those every spring and put them in our backyard. And we lived in Nebraska and put them in the backyard. And they'd be beautiful. They'd bloom flowers. And then every fall, they would die because they'd get cold and start over in spring. So one year I said, hey, I don't want those things to die. Let's find a home for them. And she said, we didn't have room in our house, good big pots. And I said, what if I took them to the office? So I took them to the office and these things flourished. And we put them outside in the summer, but in the fall we'd bring them in. And this particular tree had grown. We kept having to trim it back, but it was just this beautiful tree that had been down with us instead of 6 months, 6 years. So I'm looking at this tree going, oh, the tree's really doing well. I'm really helping it grow. And that was it. I couldn't let the tree go away and just start over because that tree should grow. It should evolve. It should change. And that was the moment. It's like, oh my gosh. And it becomes then, Robert, very empowering because it explains my behaviors. It explains my thinking. Everything is always around growth. So that was it. And hope it may not be, that may be a little anticlimactic, but that's how it happened.
And it is a fun story, and it just makes you think of all those times when we're stuck and we're trying to solve a problem. And in your case, you're saying, what am I all about? That was the problem you're trying to solve. And sometimes when you take a break and you read a book or you take a walk and you just like let your mind do its thing and be free, then you can later on make some connections and say, because I wasn't just trying to force this problem, right? You weren't making a list of like 200 things. You weren't like busting out the flip chart and like weighing all these answers. You were just like, hey, let me relax and let me work on this problem subconsciously. And then,
I had tried, but just so you know, I had tried that too. I was asking people, but it wasn't until, to your point, it wasn't until I forced myself, I was in a quiet moment, very present, very mindful, that it came to me.
Okay. And these are all good mental hygiene habits anyway, right? The being mindful, being present, being calm, being relaxed, not forcing things. And so when the way you described this sort of the leadership research, right? It kind of reminded me of like a think and grow rich kind of thing. When you said you looked at coaches and athletes and teachers and what do they do all right, you figured that if someone out there is looking to up their game as far as their own leadership, they don't have to waste a lifetime of figuring it all out, or they don't have to like get some random mentor and hope that they have the answers. They can look at the data and they can look at what's been done right. So is there something noteworthy or worthwhile mentioning about what leaders do right? Like what you've seen as far as achieving growth, there's all these areas you can think about, right? Focusing on your goals and having teamwork and kind of circling back to what you really want and focus. But what does it really come down to? Where are people stuck? What are they missing? What should they be tapping into in order to grow and be better leaders?
Uh, Thank you for asking that question, Robert. And I'll start off by saying thing number one is, and this is really hard for some people, but is to first quantify how they are impacting people now. So our approach is really taking a research-based, a science-based look at what you do well as a leader or a coach and what are your opportunities for growth. And the only way to do that, let me rephrase that, the most accurate way to do that is through really quantifying it through an assessment and survey type of research about yourself. So our approach is really, our research is all based on what are the behaviors and the activities that great leaders do that drive the most discretionary effort from people on their teams. So it's not about their decision making. It's not about their their personal habits in terms of I get up at 7 o'clock and exercise every day and I meditate. That's not about that. This is about how to get a team to perform at the higher levels. And so when even in the world of business, we call a leader a coach. We think that's more aptly put. We believe followers, people that are in a formal follower position, can have great leadership behaviors. But to be a coach, it means I got to have a team of people that I'm accountable for growing and getting to perform. So that's why we like the word coach versus lead, whether it's in a business, athletic, or even an educational setting. And while there's a lot of things, Robert, that we look at, I think probably where I'll focus are two primary general areas that one of which I'll come to later, but it's what drove my first TED Talk and really what got a lot of our research and a lot of our work off the ground. But I'll start off with something as simple that every leader knows, every coach knows, whether I'm in education, sports, or the business world, which is creating relationships. We quantify that. I think people still think, well, that's a fuzzy thing. It's squishy. It's not for us because we can quantify it now. So we can actually, Robert, if you let a team of people, we can quantify the trust-based connections you have with the people on your team. We can quantify the psychological safety that you have created within your team. And those two, what we call sub-themes, really roll up to an overall relationship theme. Everything we see when we're looking at discretionary effort in business, when we're looking at effort from athletes, when we're looking at performance on a classroom, everything that comes back, what's most endemic that those great coaches or leaders do with their students, with their athletes, or with their people on their team at work is they create trust-based relationships with them. That trumps everything. Then the next piece that and there's more, but this last piece that I'll call out, which is kind of, my kids always said, it's going to be my epitaph, funeral on my headstone, which is growth only occurs in a state of discomfort. And the first TED Talk that I did was titled, Why Comfort Will Ruin Your Life. And from that is a body of research that shows great coaches make their people uncomfortable in a healthy way because it's the only way to get them to grow. It is it. So without being in what's called a state of complexity or a state of discomfort, I cannot grow. The challenge is and human beings typically don't want to be in a state of discomfort. We look for order. We look for predictability, things that make us feel good. Discomfort is the antithesis of that. It's unpredictability. And so coaches, the other thing they do is they create, I say, healthy discomfort. Not continually. You can't live in a constant state of discomfort, but I have to know you well enough. So that's why relationship is important, Robert. If I'm your coach, I have to know what makes you tick, the things that make you uncomfortable, the things that allow you to stay in comfort. I have to understand who you are. I've got to crawl inside. And when that's done, I know when you need to get pushed. I know when you need to just settle down a little bit. And that's what great coaches do. Now, I'm going to qualify it one more time when I say healthy. Fear can create discomfort, but that is not a healthy discomfort. So as coaches, as leaders, We need to make sure the discomfort we're creating is done in a healthy way. It is something done with objectives and goals and talents and strengths in mind, not fear. You better hit it or else. You make a mistake or else. You know what I mean? It has to be done in a healthy way.
I like that a lot. That is quite a bit to think about in a good way, that we need to have these relationships and have this trust and to be pushing towards this healthy discomfort. Because when we talk about some of these businessy ideas and about leadership, it's really easy to fall into philosophical land, right? And it hurts my brain because when I hear some of these keywords, I think like, "Ooh, I'm getting excited because that's comfortable, that's familiar, I've heard of that thing." But then I feel like I don't get anywhere, right? I just kind of I'm revisiting old ideas. But then what you're saying here about quantifying and taking the test and taking the assessment and seeing what these numerical levels are like how are these relationships, how well does your team trust you, and then build your values. That's really great. And as you were explaining that about the discomfort, the metaphor that came to my head is like when you're lifting weights, right? If you lift too many weights too fast and too long, then you hurt yourself or you end up tearing a muscle or burning muscle. Versus if you're more strategic about it and you say, well, I'll lift the weights on this day and then next day I'll do leg day, and you give your muscles time to rebuild. You're not just being a blunt force object. And kind of the metaphor that for me to go back in the reality is when you say like the fear-based motivation, it's wild, it's chaotic, it's unpredictable, it's a shortcut. It's maybe a way to sometimes get results, but you can't build anything sustainable on that. And so I would love to jump in and talk about how you make this change happen, right? Because you go and you help people become coaches, not just leaders and followers, but actually people that have these good relationships. And so I imagine you may have jumped into like a situation or two where it was really bad or on the wrong track, and you jumped in and worked your magic and made the situation a lot better. So does anything come to mind as far as like the before and after about the change that you've made?
Me personally,
Yeah, like you personally, like if you jumped into a company and things were just like not that great, and you said, "Hey, you need to apply this system and fix things."
uh, yeah, yes. There's always, you know, I have to apply these things to myself all the time, Robert. And I still screw as many things up as I get right. You know, I really do. Um, but I think what I tell people, and so I answer your question somewhat indirectly, which is if you want to jump into an organization, or if you're involved in an organization that perhaps is not hitting on all cylinders, that should be growing more at a better level, you got to first go home and look in the mirror and to your point, apply it to yourself. So it's if I want my team to grow, I have to go first. I have to change the way I think. I have to change my own behaviors. And so there's always a constant assessment of, and this is where we need to be in touch with ourselves enough to know that there should be a continual assessment of not just what you're not doing well. And I want to emphasize that because we're probably, you've heard it, we're all our own best critics. We have a tendency to come into a room and analyze ourselves like a fly versus a bee, meaning that we come in, we're looking for crap versus honey. And we need to take just as much time or more time to look at, to behave like a bee and look at the honey. What are the good things I'm doing? And I have to continually remind myself of that. And then I have to objectively come back and either through, some of the surveys or the assessments or just self-thought or just listening to people, being aware enough to say, okay, I'm not doing this well. And so there's not so much an event or a total story, because that would denote there's like a destination, and there's never a destination. It's just a constant journey of evolution to scale ourselves, to scale a company, because it's never the same. The people are different and people make things go. The technology is different. The circumstances are different. My goodness, you look at the world of education today, which is one of our markets, pre-COVID to post-COVID, totally different.
Huge.
You
Yeah.
look at the world of sports, pre-COVID, post-COVID. In business, pre-COVID, post-COVID. everything's evolved. You cannot scale the same way you were scaling before COVID. So I hope that helps. I hope that answers your question to some degree.
It does. That we need to self-assess and be self-reflective, and the only constant is change. And so your choices are either to let your natural caveman instincts kick in and play it safe and just sort of maintain or maybe decrease a little bit, and also be slightly negative, right? All that is what is built in, and we have to use our conscious mind and say, I need to every day apply a little more positivity and find a better perspective on things just for my own mental health, and be a little more positive, even though maybe it's unnatural, but that is the way to be a more evolved human being and to be someone that others look up to, and that way we can help out just to rise above our programming, so to speak. And so as far as getting to this self-assessment, like you said before, that you ask yourself, what is your why? Do any other questions come to mind about like what you ask yourself every day? Do you think to you said a minute ago that you think about like what's good in a situation, but do you ask yourself like, do I work on this, or do more or less of that? Like, what kind of questions do you find yourself asking yourself?
Oh, wow. You're asking really good questions, by the way. Speaking of the
Thank
devil.
you.
Robert, every day I spend, no, let me back up, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I have a routine. So it's not that I am constantly evolving, but sometimes it's routines that allow us to evolve. And so every Monday through Friday, first thing in the morning, I do is I open my laptop up and I close my eyes, and my coach got me to do this, and I've been doing it now for 7 years, I think. Brain download is what she calls it. Some people call it journaling, but it's a way to just get things that are off my brain down. And I just close my eyes and I just, whatever comes in mind, I just start typing and I just go. And I've got like 300 some pages of this just single spaced, brain downloading. But what it does is it can take, people that wake up 3 or 4 in the morning, like myself, and it's like, oh my gosh, I've got A, B, and C, D, and F to do, and how am I going to handle this? And what it does, it forces me to quiet that voice and apply it in the morning. Because if you can get it from here to on a document, that's pretty dang good. So every Monday through Friday, I do that, followed by gratitudes. I have to again, getting back to, we can behave way too much like a fly versus a bee. And I'm no different than everyone else. So every day I force myself to write down 3 things that I'm grateful for, or 3 things that make me smile. That way my day starts off in a positive mind frame, not a negative mind frame. At the bottom of that, as corny as it may sound, I have written affirmations I have to look at daily to remind myself of the things that I do well, my strengths, and what my why is, and am I serving my why? I look at those every single morning. Well, again, Monday through Friday. And then the last thing I do, and I've been doing for, again, about 7 years, is daily meditation. So between the meditation, the gratitudes, and the journaling, or what I say, brain downloading, those are all 3 mindfulness activities that allow me to keep a mental edge. They allow me to continually evolve, and they open my mind to different things.
Wonderful. I like hearing that. That's fascinating that you figured out which tools, because there's so many tools, right? There's so many different ways that we can work on ourselves. We have to use something, and you figured out what works for you personally, and you figured out the how to do it on a repeat basis and fit it into your schedule. And the aha I'm getting from your answer there is that not all routines are bad, right? It's easy if you're like, say, a young person, you think like, oh well, habits and routines and repetition, that's just like keeping myself where I'm at. But if, as long as you're pointed towards growth, and you figure out through maybe trial and error or advice some of these activities, some of this mindfulness that you're describing, and the meditation and the journaling, if that's something that keeps you on a growth path, then some amount of organization, discipline, having meetings, having a calendar, all that is great as a useful tool, as long as it's not your entire day or not everything you do. And then also that you understand that it's not something that holds you back. It's a tool to get you to where you want to go. You
Yeah.
do the journaling and you get the creativity, get the
And
new
stick
ideas,
on
new
that for a
actions.
second, if I may, Brian, because, or
Let's do
Robert,
it.
Brian, where did that come from?
Close
Because
enough.
that's a really important differentiation. There are routines that create growth, and there are routines where growth is not needed. When you're a pilot flying an airplane, would you rather have them follow a routine, or are you really worried about your pilot growing? You want them to
Follow
follow
the
a routine,
pre-flight
right?
checklist, please. Yes,
You
yes,
don't care
please.
about whether or not your pilot grows. You just want a very predictable outcome. So the pilot's routine is not about growth. It's about having a predictable outcome, get you from point A to point B safely. Surgery, you don't care about growth. You just want the surgeon to have a predictable outcome, which is that you wake up. Then there are routines, and you can think about it athletically, you can think about it mentally. You know, we do drills in sports. It's a basketball drills that create growth, right? It's a routine, but it creates growth. The challenge is if you do those routines over and over and over again, even though they're creating growth, pretty soon you can plateau. And the only way to prevent that is by changing the routine. But you're right, to your point, those routines, those habits are habits with a growth outcome, not a predictable outcome.
And that's a great insight because growth doesn't always mean advanced, right? When you mentioned about the pilot or the doctor, if I'm thinking, well, I would like the pilot or the doctor to grow in the sense that flying the plane is routine for them, but they also pay attention. And if some blinking light comes on, they're like, oh yeah, like we know what this is, we'll handle this, and they remain calm because they've seen it all before. Don't need my pilot doing barrel rolls or like juggling
Right.
or something while he's flying the plane.
Exactly. You want them to be evolving. You just don't need it while they're in the air with you. You
Yes.
want
Yeah, do that on
their
their own
growth
time.
to come at a different time. My growth comes in the mornings and other times, but it's usually not. I'm not practicing that with people on my team.
Well, wonderful. And so this is a really fun conversation. We're getting into all these subtopics, but I want
Yeah.
to make sure that we're staying on what it is that excites you and that what you want to talk about. So in these last few minutes of our conversation, is there a missing question here? Is there something that you wish I'd asked you? And can we pretend that I asked you it and you could just answer it to me?
I wish you'd asked me. I'm considering. I think I wish you'd asked me, how is it done? How do we really get an accurate understanding? Because the answer is complicated yet very simple. If you want to know how effective you are as a leader, we got to go to the people on your team and get it from them. If you want to know whether or not you're an effective coach, you can't look at your win-loss record. You got to go to the people on your team. You want to know if you're an effective teacher, you got to look at more than just standardized test scores. You got to look at your impact on the kids in other ways, because some of the things we're finding is that in education, the stronger the relationship with the student, the better experience a student has. Attendance goes up, GPAs go up. It applies in the world of sports too, and it applies in business too. And the only way to do that accurately is through a really scientifically administered and accurate data gathered in a survey. And it's really a simple thing to understand. The challenge is doing it the right way. Because a lot of people think, oh, survey, I'll go do that. I'll just create one and I'll give it to the people on my team. Well, it doesn't work that way. You're probably going to get in, well, you will likely get inaccurate data, and you'll be making decisions that are not factually based.
If you were my boss and you could know my handwriting was me, I'd give you 100%, 5 stars the whole way through. I just want to please you, right?
Yeah. So there's science to understanding our impact as leaders and coaches. And it's really applying that in a healthy, accurate way. So we're making decisions based on fact and not just opinion.
And that is why people need your company. Is that right? That way the
Yeah,
test
that's
can
it.
be
Yeah,
administered
thank you.
in the correct way and it's not just haphazard.
It's a plug for our organization, but it's what we do. And it's tough because you get exposed as a leader when you look at your results and you see that, hey, half the people that report to me don't believe that we have a connection. That's hard to hear. The world of sports, to hear that athletes don't feel safe within a psychological, they don't feel psychologically safe, that half of them in a team don't feel, that's hard for a coach to hear. But that's where improvement begins. That's where our opportunity to scale begins. It's by exposing ourselves in a way where I can look and I go, now I know where I can grow.
Those are some harsh life truths, aren't they? That you
Yeah.
need to experience the pain and maybe that rude awakening of here's what people really think and here's how people are maybe unsatisfied or unhappy, and you get that. And then that is the starting point for you making a change. And that's a really powerful idea that it's not just about your own skewed, distorted perspective of how well you think you are as a leader. It's what other people think of you. It's like if you go to Michael Jordan's Wikipedia page and Michael Jordan said, "Hey, I want to change that," Wikipedia says, "Nope, this is only allowed to be edited by what others think of you. You yourself are not allowed to edit your Wikipedia page." And it makes total sense, right? If you're trying to help others, that what the result is how they're treated.
I love that analogy that you use, because I remember the Last Dance, that Netflix documentary on the Chicago Bulls of Michael Jordan, and then following after the release of that, they were interviewing Phil Jackson, and I'm paraphrasing this, but somebody said to Phil that that they don't believe a lot of that was accurately portrayed, and Phil said, no, it was very accurately portrayed through Michael's eyes. So
Nice.
I mean, it's like, okay, that's how Michael saw it. And feels like you can't say it's inaccurate because that's what he saw. So I loved how he approached that.
And it hurts our brain a little bit just to have that awareness of saying like, okay, the way I see things might not be the reality that is needed in order to make this change. So you've given us all sorts of ideas, things to think about, things to work on, things to do differently, but we can't really make any sort of substantial progress unless we get the real help, right? From the source, from the man himself, from the company. So what are some next steps here? If people are excited about the possibilities of being better coaches and getting better results, who is the solution for, and where should they go as far as finding out more about you and your organization?
Well, again, thank you for that opportunity. Two things. Number one, on the Excel Institute website, there is a free, fun things called the Growth Ring Indicator, which was developed after my first TED Talk, where it really measures where you are in the stagnation to chaos scale. Are you healthy in between, or are you too far to one end? And it's called the Growth Rings Indicator, and they can get on there. The TED Talk is a 12-minute TED Talk called Why Comfort Will Ruin Your Life. But I would tell people, if they really want to know, if they truly are interested, whether I'm in education or athletics or in business, if I want to know my impact, they need to hire somebody to quantify it for them, and that's what we can do. And all growth begins with that discovery, or pulling back the curtain on ourselves. And that's where it would begin. And everything can be seen and done through Excel Institute's website in terms of reaching out. And I'd love to hear from people, or if they just want to talk about it, they can reach out to me. I always respond to
Okay.
people.
And do we have some sort of a URL, a link, and or a way to search you and find you on social media to start that conversation?
Yes, I am on LinkedIn. I think just Bill Extrom on LinkedIn. Eckstrom WL, which William Lane, my my official first name. So Eckstrom WL, and at Bill Extrom on Twitter. I'm over all those places. BillExtrom.com. That's Eckstrom is ECKSTROM as a personal website. A lot of people reach out to me, which is really interesting, through my personal website. They find me there as opposed to the company's website, because that first silly TED Talk, I say silly, but that first TED Talk I did has over 5 million views. So people are still 6 years later reaching out to me wanting to visit about that. So a lot of different
People say,
places.
I need to find out more. Yes.
Find me. I'm around there. You put my name into Google, there'll be plenty of places to reach me.
Fantastic. So that is Bill Extrom. Put him in Google, put him in LinkedIn, Instagram, and check out Excel Institute. As we're wrapping up our conversation here, Bill, it's time to put you on the spot and ask you for a quote or lesson that you think can really help us out today and send us on our way? So what comes to mind as far as a helpful quote or lesson?
I'm gonna use what quotes come and go for me. More the one right now that is the most poignant to me is it is often attributed to I'm thinking of the Austrian psychologist at Man's Search for Meaning, Dr. Viktor Frankl. Since learned that there's never been able to prove that he did it. But the quote is this: between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. That is one right now that keeps me going a lot. It's one I think about. It's in my consciousness continually. Just because I get triggered doesn't mean I need to respond right away. Use the power of the pause.
I love that. Wild animals have no choice, right? They have the stimulus and the response and they go right to it. But us humans, we can think things through and we should, because that's where that growth and change happens. So Bill Extrom, find him all over, find him on Google and social media. It's been a wonderful conversation, Bill.
Thank you. I appreciate it. You've been a great host.
You've been a great guest.
Thank you, sir.